So for the past year, the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 has been my favorite soundbar to use and recommend. You really can't go wrong with this soundbar. It sounds great and it can easily fill a small or medium-sized room with sound. But more importantly, it also has a ton of bass all by itself, which is really going to help immerse you in your content whenever you're watching a movie with the soundbar. But I thought it'd be fun to explore what else Bose has to offer. So today we are going to check out the Bose Smart Soundbar 700, a real step up from the Bose Smart Soundbar 300. Now regarding pricing, the Smart Soundbar 700 has a retail price of $800, and for comparison's sake, the Smart Soundbar 300 has a retail price of $450, a $50 price increase from the last time we covered the 300. Nonetheless, you really can't go wrong with the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 if you've got a small or medium-sized room, whereas the 700 is going to be better suited for a larger room. Now, for simplicity's sake, in this video, we are only going to be focusing on the 700. Now, you can go ahead and attach either one or two external bass modules and or surround sound speakers. But for the purpose of this review, we are only going to be focusing on the 700 and seeing if it's worth upgrading from the 300. Nonetheless, if you want to pick either of these two soundbars up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch shelf down below. I've made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And if you've been watching me for a while, you know I can be very particular. So I'll only set my name on something that I'm really proud of. Now first, let's talk about the design of this soundbar. Now the 700 has a very subtle design to it, very similar to all of Bose's other soundbars. There's a metal grille on the front and there's an indicator light that really only illuminates itself when you're adjusting the volume, going through the setup process, or when you're interacting with your voice assistant. Other than that, the 700 mostly disappears when you're watching content in a dark room, which is good because the soundbar is supposed to be heard, not seen. However, I say the 700 mostly disappears because the glass top on the soundbar can cause a reflection. Now, I know this sounds very minor, but I thought it was worth pointing out because it could be distracting for some people, because it is for me, and it definitely is one of the first things that I noticed when I went from the 300 to the 700. The glass top on the 700 has this reflection going on, whereas the 300 doesn't have this reflection issue because its top is plastic. But when it comes to overall dimensions, the 700 has a length of 38.5 inches. It has a height of 2¼ inches and it has a thickness of 4¼ inches. And it weighs in at 10.5 pounds. And for comparison's sake, here it is compared to the 300. The 300 has the same thickness and height, but it's not as long. Now, you can wall mount the 700, but its wall mounting kit is sold separately, so don't go looking for it in the box. But now let's talk about what does come included in the box. Now, obviously, you've got your power cable, and thankfully, there is no external power brick that you've got to worry about hiding, which is especially good if you're thinking about wall mounting the 900. However, unfortunately, this power cable is pretty short, coming in at only 5 feet. So weaving it through your home theater setup might be a little bit of a challenge. Now, you also get a high-speed HDMI cable included in the box, which I feel is important to point out because the 300 does not come included with an HDMI cable. Now, the 700 also comes included with an optical cable, just in case your TV doesn't have an HDMI port that has ARC or eARC support. But I'm just being blunt here, if you've got a TV that doesn't have ARC support, I think it's more important that you upgrade your TV before getting the 700, because without ARC support, you're not going to be able to fully enjoy your content that might be using an audio format that requires a higher bit rate that can't be provided through an optical port. And also, you won't be able to use Alexa to control your TV with just your voice. Now, you're also going to see that there's a micro USB port on this soundbar, and ideally you will never have to use this micro USB port because it's strictly used for service. Now, you're also going to see some audio jacks here in which you would plug in your external bass modules and or surround sound speakers. But one port that's here that isn't on the 300 is an Ethernet port. Now, you don't necessarily have to use the Ethernet port on this soundbar because it does have Wi-Fi, but if you're planning on placing this soundbar in an area of the house with spotty Wi-Fi, and if you plan on regularly streaming to it using AirPlay or Chromecast, or if you plan on regularly using it as a smart speaker, then it might be worth it to you to use that Ethernet port. But again, just being blunt, if you have spotty Wi-Fi, then I would recommend that you upgrade your wireless network. Because if you upgrade your wireless network, then this is going to improve your streaming experience. Your content won't buffer. But you don't have to use Wi-Fi on the soundbar if you don't want to. But if you still want to be able to use this soundbar as a normal speaker and just use it for listening to music, then you can always just connect to it using trusty old Bluetooth. However, personally, I do recommend that you connect the soundbar to Wi-Fi, so this way you can just AirPlay to it or cast to it more easily. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this soundbar has Alexa support, and it also has Google Assistant support, so you can use either voice assistant. However, only Alexa will allow you to use your voice to control your TV using Bose's Voice for Video feature. Alexa, watch Comedy Central.
Tuning to Comedy Central, now airing Seinfeld.
So, if you're someone that's looking to add voice control capabilities to your TV, you can do that through Alexa. However, I do have to admit that Voice for Video can be rather slow. It works and it's robust, but personally, I still prefer to use my remote. But now let's talk about what's under the hood of this soundbar. The 700 has a single center-mounted tweeter, which is then flanked by a total of 4 frontward-firing woofers, 2 on each side. And at each end of this soundbar, there are bass chambers. And for comparison's sake, the 300 also has a center-mounted tweeter, which is then flanked by a pair of woofers. You've got your bass chambers, and at the end of this soundbar, there is an additional woofer that is angled out at a 45-degree angle. Overall, the 700 is a more capable version of the 300. It gets significantly louder, and it has a little more bass. However, something that I did notice about the 700 is that it sounds very bright. The highs are very exaggerated. So exaggerated that I actually had to go in and lower the treble on this soundbar in order to get this sound test to work. Nonetheless, in this sound test, the TV is playing at max volume, the 300 is playing at 85% volume with its stock EQ, and the 700 is playing at 70% volume with its treble set to -20.
A broken glass while I'm thinking in my head. I mind my own, I don't even break a sweat. Oh, this matters is insane. Why you still live in vain? I'm not the one, you're the victim of your own mistakes. It's sad to hear the lights under the street lights, under the street lights. Untold stories, they were left behind. Silent breeze, I got nothing on my mind. This matters is insane. Why you still live in vain? I'm not the one, you're the victim of your own mistakes. It's sad to hear the lights under the street lights, under the street lights.
Reloading. You're the new killer?
I am trained.
So like you may have just heard, obviously any soundbar is going to sound better than your TV's built-in speakers. Your TV most likely just has a pair of downward firing speakers that bounce sound off of the table. They probably don't get all that loud and they become a rattling mess when the bass really gets going at higher volumes. Whereas that just isn't an issue with a soundbar. Now, from a performance standpoint, the 700 has the same instrument separation and clarity as the 300, except it does get noticeably louder. However, like I mentioned earlier, the 700 sounds much brighter than the 300 right out of the box. It also sounds significantly brighter than the Smart Soundbar 900. So definitely with the 700, I recommend that you go in and lower that treble. However, I also have to point out that at higher volumes, the highs on the 700 do like to distort a little bit. And I feel that I really gotta point this out because distortion is not an issue with either the 300 or 900. So overall, from a performance standpoint, the 700 is going to get noticeably louder than the 300, making it better suited for a larger room. And at max volume, the 700 is going to get just as loud as the 900. The 700 also has the same amount of bass as the 900, which is more bass than you will find on the 300, but it's not a huge difference. And when it comes to instrument separation and clarity, the 700 performs just as the 300, meaning that neither the 700 or 300 are going to sound as spacious as the 900. So overall, what I'm trying to say here is the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 is going to have no problem filling a small or medium-sized room. And if you were to pair it with an external bass module, then it should be able to satiate most people. However, if you have a larger room, then you might want to go with the 700. But if you're thinking about picking up the 700, then I highly advise that you just spring for the 900. The 900 is going to get just as loud and have the same amount of bass as the 700, but it has much better instrument separation and it sounds much more spacious than both the 300 and 700. And thanks to its dual upward firing woofers, you're going to get a much better sense of verticality in your audio, and you're also going to be able to fully enjoy Dolby Atmos content. However, one thing the 700 does have that neither the 300 or 900 come close to having is this universal remote. And I have to admit, this is a very nice universal remote. And the layout of these buttons changes depending on what you're controlling. Now, obviously, you can use this remote to control your soundbar, but you can also connect it to your TV, cable box, if you still have one of those, or you can connect it to your Blu-ray player. Now, even though I really like this remote and is way more capable than the remote that comes included with both the 300 or 900, I still prefer and recommend that you go with the 900 over the 700 simply because the 900 just has way better sound quality. And personally, I never really use the remotes that come included with my soundbar. I always just use the app. Now, through this app, you can adjust the volume, change the source, and you can also adjust the EQ to your liking. And like I mentioned earlier, it is super important that you lower the treble on the 700. Now, after I have lowered the treble on the soundbar, I do like to raise the center channel so that its dialogue is more pronounced, and I also like to raise the bass. But also, through this app, you can set up the adaptive EQ on this soundbar, and this is something that isn't found on the 300. Basically, you plug in this thing into the soundbar and you put it on your head. And for the record, it is not big head approved. Now basically what you're going to do is that you're going to sit in different areas of the room where you will sit, and the soundbar is going to play some sounds and then it's going to calibrate itself. Now, even though this isn't something that's unique to Bose, and I do feel that you should be able to use your phone's microphone instead of using this microphone, I do highly advise that you go through the setup process when you first get your soundbar, just so that it can get calibrated to the furniture in your room. And this is a calibration process that you would want to do again if you were to move around the furniture in your room. But finally, let's talk about pairing the soundbar up to other speakers. Now, if you've got other Bose Smart Soundbars, or if you have other Bose Smart Home speakers lying around the house, you can sync them up all together and get them to play in sync. But also, thanks to Bose's Simple Sync, you can also pair a Bluetooth device to the soundbar and get them to play in sync. Now, you can pair a portable Bluetooth speaker up to it, or you can also pair a pair of headphones up to it, and this way you can fully enjoy your content late at night without having to worry about waking anybody up. Now, Bose's Simple Sync works just fine with most other Bose products. That's why I'm using the Bose QC45 and Bose SoundLink Flex as an example here. However, technically, Bose's Simple Sync is supposed to be product agnostic, so you should be able to pair other non-Bose products up to your soundbar. However, in this example, I just can't get my Sony 1000XM4s to pair up with this soundbar. So what I'm trying to say is Bose's Simple Sync is cool and all, and it should be able to work with most products, but if you want to be on the safe side, you might want to use it with other Bose products. So with all that being said, the Bose Smart Soundbar 700 is just a louder version of the 300 that has a little more bass. Now, it also has an additional Ethernet port and it comes included with a universal remote. But unfortunately, the inclusion of the Ethernet port and this universal remote is not going to affect my purchase decision here. The most important thing here to me is sound quality. Now, unfortunately, the 700 has the same instrument separation and clarity as the 300. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you were to upgrade to the 900 from the 700, you are going to notice a big sound quality improvement. So, like I mentioned earlier, if you were to get the Bose Smart Soundbar 300 and pair it up with a bass module, it should be able to satiate most people. However, if you have a larger room and you need a larger soundbar, I highly recommend that you skip the 700 and just go straight to the 900. I truly feel that you are going to get a much better bang for your buck with the 900 because it has much better instrument separation, and thanks to its upward firing woofers, you're going to get a much better sense of verticality in your content. Combined with a bass module, the 900 is going to be able to much better immerse you in your content than the 700 ever can. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know, I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something that I'm really proud of.